this video, I would like to demonstrate one of the basic techniques of watercolor painting with wet paint on dry paper. It's an essential technique, and practicing it helps us to learn to control paint, water, and watercolor paper. I'll be painting these wildflowers. I'm making a very light pencil sketch. Mostly I want to draw the jar. I don't want to draw the flowers. I can just paint them. It doesn't really matter if they're not exactly in the same spots as they are in the photo, but if you're a beginner and you need a little bit of help, you don't feel comfortable painting freehand, by all means, you can sketch out the flowers as well. Just make the pencil sketch very light. If you watch my videos, you know that I painted these flowers before. I painted them with a dark background, which was a fairly complicated process. I nearly messed it up, and I rescued the painting with white gouache. The process was pretty long and involved, and I decided to use this beautiful photo for one more painting and make it a lot easier to paint, a lot more simple, but still keep it very beautiful, even very watercolor-like, with bright colors, lots of movement, lots of energy. Let's see if we can achieve that without the complex background. For watercolor, as for other mediums as well, when we paint, the shape of the brush will have a big influence on the shape of our brush strokes and on the quality of those brush strokes that the viewers will see on paper. I think it's especially important for watercolor to have a good selection of brushes because, as I'm demonstrating now, with watercolor, the less we touch the paint and the less we mess with brush strokes that we already applied, the better they're going to look. Because the paint particles are suspended in gum arabic and water, and if we start disturbing them, picking up paint or trying to move it around too much or applying too many layers of paint, if you have any experience with watercolor, you know what happens. It becomes patchy, they can be water blossoms, or watercolor can become dull and muddy. As you saw, the first brush that I'm using is a round number 10 brush, synthetic bristles, and basically what I'm doing is picking up paint. I mixed up this pinkish purple, it's cobalt violet, and I'm mixing it up with opera pink. We can also move on to a cobalt violet deep, maybe mix in some other colors. The exact pigment that you use doesn't matter. The thing that I'm trying to show in this demonstration is the technique, the paint application. So basically I pick up the paint. It can be mixed with a lot of pigment and very little water. That's very important, not to make a very diluted mixture, because then it will be so transparent you won't be able to see it. We need some color for these flowers. They're very colorful. Or I can pick the paint from the well directly if I need even more intensity. And then I basically leave an imprint of the brush on paper and I leave it alone and I let it dry. I'm using 300 pound, 100% cotton paper. I know it's expensive, but it will give you best results, especially if you're a beginner. Using low quality paper, especially if it has no cotton in it, is very hard. So it will make your life as watercolor artist that much harder. I also have this peach color. It's handmade watercolor. I think it works well for those larger flowers. They have warmer tint, that warmer pink that I see in them. And as we move to painting these flowers, you see the kind of variation on wet on dry paint application. I paint the base of the flower with pure pigment, and then I use clean water to paint the rest of the flower. My brush is clean. It has just a tiny bit of water on it. It's not dripping wet. And I soften the edge of the paint and I create the rest of the flower. If your paint dried, you can still use this technique. You just have to scrub the paint a little bit to get it going again, and you can still distribute it and create that soft gradation. The most important thing is to have clean water. Do not use dirty water that you use for washing your brush for this technique. You need to have a separate container with clean water. Okay, this is it for the flowers for now. We will work on them a little bit more later. Now we need to paint the stems. I switched to a dagger brush. This is 3/8 of an inch brush with very long bristles. It's very flexible and it has very sharp point. I'm going to use this brush again to apply just pure pigment on paper. to paint the leaves and the stems, but I will be using this brush in two ways. I will be using it on the edge to create thin lines, the stems, and also I will be turning it on the side to paint the leaves. It's a very, very versatile tool, this brush. I highly recommend including it in your set of brushes for watercolor. The bristles are also synthetic, and that brush is not super expensive, so it will be a good tool to have. So I'm connecting the flowers to the vase, painting the stems and painting the leaves. And as you can see, I am following the reference photo pretty loosely. Nobody, when they look at your painting, nobody will know how many leaves there were, how many flowers, how big they were, where they were located. So our goal is to use the reference photo for inspiration and to just paint a beautiful painting, make everything look good. If you want to have a reference to watercolor brushstrokes that you can refer to when you're painting or just look at your free time, I have an ebook that's available for free on my website, kseniaanis.com. I will leave you the link in the description below. You can download that ebook and use it whenever you like. And I demonstrate the use of different brushes and different color application techniques for watercolor. So if you're interested, go to the video description below and download that ebook. It's totally free. It also includes some examples of my paintings, so you can kind of connect the technique to the final result. Our bouquet is starting to take shape. I think some more pink flowers will be good here on top. And we also can start adding a little more definition to the flowers themselves. You see, I am applying a second layer of paint on some of the flowers to give them a little more volume, and also create visual interest. I did not speed up this video because I want you to see the real speed with which I work. I just cut out some pauses and repetitions. And as you see, I'm not painting very fast. It's important to kind of think about every brush stroke. I sometimes see, especially beginner artists, they think if they paint really fast, that will make the painting more spontaneous and loose. I'm not saying you have to agonize over each brush stroke, not at all. Definitely keep it moving forward, but at the same time, give yourself time to think where the next brush stroke needs to go. Don't just dab the brush on paper, because in watercolor especially, every brush stroke counts. We don't really make corrections very much. It's all painted a la prima, so to say, at least the technique I'm showing. So we need to make every brush stroke count, and every brush stroke needs to make sense and be in its place. So don't rush, kind of pace yourself and evaluate the results and ask yourself, before I put this brush stroke down, is it really necessary? Is it a good idea to do this? Okay, our next brush will be my favorite 1/4 inch dagger brush. I use this brush to work on darker areas and on smaller details. As you see, I am gradually darkening certain areas. My previous dagger brush was becoming a little too large for the details that I need to work on. I have quite a bit on paper already. I went down from 3/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch to a smaller size. It allows me to work with more precision, and also it holds more pigment and less water, and I can start applying darker brush strokes. Even though watercolor is very transparent, the colors can be very light, we still need light, mid-tone and dark areas in our painting. So don't stop after you've just applied one layer of light colors. Add some contrast to your painting. You see, I mixed phthalo green and I neutralized it a little bit with opera pink. Give me beautiful kind of bluish purple color that works great for darker areas, for shadows. And basically this is just pigment with no water. I keep working wet on dry, and I'm deepening certain areas in my painting. All right, let's work on that mason jar that's serving as a vase in our painting. I want to size up my brush. 1/4 inch would be too small for this slightly larger object. So I switched to 1/2 inch angled brush, and I'm going to paint the jar. Glass can be a little intimidating to paint. I think the important thing is to just have a lot of tonal range, to have those very light areas, highlights, which we will add later. There are mid-tone areas, those kind of subtle green, blue transitions, and there are very dark areas. So if we just kind of copy what we see in the reference photo, it should look like glass. Just don't paint it one solid color. If you do those tonal variations, it will look like glass. See, there is some very dark colors there in the middle. The edges will be lighter because the jar is rounded. And strictly speaking, in the jar, I started with wet on dry. I applied paint to dry paper, and then those dark areas I applied into wet paint. So that was wet on wet painting, which we will discuss in detail in another video that I'm working on right now. I will be showing that technique on a simple subject in one of my next videos. All right, I need to paint the brick. And again, I'm sizing my brush up. I'm using an angled brush, but I moved to a 3/4 inch brush because this is even larger area. When painting wet on dry, you don't want to use tiny brushes for large areas because that leads to streaks and it's just hard, takes a long time, paint starts to dry and it just doesn't look right. So the brush needs to correspond with the area, with the size of the area that you're painting. And I like those angled brushes because, again, I can use them in two ways. I can use them on the edge to create straight, narrow lines, and I can use them flat on the side to paint larger areas. Some of the flowers are white, but I have white background, so I cannot paint white on white. It's not good to show, so I think I'll make those flowers very pale yellow. I'm using lemon yellow, which is my artistic license to use the colors that I want and that my painting needs. And also that lemon yellow adds a lot of sunshine to my painting. It warms everything up. And I can also use it to unify the center of the bouquet a little bit. I have white paper showing there. There shouldn't be any white. If you look at the bouquet, it's a solid mass of stems and flowers. So we need to get rid of all that white paper. This technique is called negative painting, but it's an easier version of negative painting because I'm painting with light colors. So I can go over dark areas that I already painted, and it doesn't matter if I disturb them. If I paint over them, they're already dry, and light color doesn't disturb them and doesn't muddy them. I'm unifying the center of the bouquet. Again, switched back to a small dagger brush to 1/4 inch. Gives me a lot of control over my details. Brick is reflecting in the mason jar, so a couple of peach brush strokes. Everything is very light, especially on top. Let's add a couple of dark areas on the stems with phthalo green. Maybe use cascade green on some of the leaves. Gives our bouquet a lot more dimensionality, a lot more interest. Again, you see I am not going fast. I am thinking about each brush stroke, where it needs to go. I'm kind of working with my painting, not against it, not trying to force it into something, but kind of gradually adding to it. The geometry of the jar is important, so definitely check that the sides are straight and that they're vertical. And let's paint the cast shadow on the brick. This is cobalt blue that I mixed with what was left of that purple color that I used for shadows. This needs to be fairly transparent. That's why I'm mixing it on the palette to make sure it's not too strong. Even though that shadow is pretty dark, especially towards us, it's going to be darker. Those little flowers cast tiny little shadows that I'm painting with the tip of the brush. Again, I'm working wet on dry. The brick that I painted dried already. So as you see, the color stays in place, it doesn't run, and I get distinct shape. The shadow under the jar will be darker. Let's darken it with another layer of paint, more pigment. And the edges of the brick cast shadows onto the joints between them, onto the cement, and we're going to paint them as well. I didn't space them correctly. They all need to be evenly spaced. So let's rub this one out. Just clean brush with some water. Again, important to have a clean water container. So this one needs to be over here somewhere to be evenly spaced, and the rest will be in shadow. If you're a big fan of watercolor and you want to know everything there is to know about it, I have a class that's called From Zero to Watercolor Hero, where I talk about all the techniques that you need for watercolor painting. I also talk about painting itself, about composition and design, how to make your painting attractive to viewers. I talk about several ways to paint white in watercolor. So if you're interested in full course of watercolor painting, go to the description under this video. I offer a discount for my YouTube viewers, for fans of my channel. Click on the link, it will take you to my website and you can learn more about that class, and you can watch a preview video where I describe the class in detail and show the artwork that we create during that class. It's a lot of demonstrations. We talk about flowers, but we just use them as an example of watercolor techniques. After this class, you'll be able to paint whatever you like. Of course, we need to add the highlights on the jars. We talked about that to make it look like glass. I'm using white ink. This is white calligraphy ink. My small dagger brush again. I need a lot of precision here. It's not a good idea to make the highlights too heavy, too pronounced. They're very subtle. So just a couple of lines with white ink. I didn't talk about it, but you saw it on the video. I added splattering with different colors. I use the technique to connect my subject, which is placed in the center of the painting, to the edges of the sheet. That makes it more balanced. And because I have some darker areas on the bouquet, I'm just going to splatter just a couple of little splatters to show highlights on the flowers. And our painting is done. Here are all the brushes that I used for the painting. You see, each brush was used for a different purpose and created different brush marks. I think even though we didn't paint the background, which would have taken us many hours and would be fairly difficult to do, the painting still looks beautiful. Let me know in comments if you agree with that statement and what you think about this technique. I hope you watched the other video with this bouquet. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one here on Tamara Studios channel.